One of the greatest pleasures in bringing you this podcast is that we get to meet with people with a passion for what they do. This episode is no different, as we're in Baldonnel with the Irish Air Corp as they celebrate not only 100 years of operation, but especially this week, 10 years of the Emergency Aeromedical Service EAS. The Emergency Aeromedical Service, resident in Custume Barracks in Athlone, is a joint project between the HSE and the Defence Forces. AIRCORP flight crews work alongside National Ambulance Service Advanced Paramedics in a dedicated military helicopter to rapidly transfer critical patients to the most appropriate hospital in the country. The service was initially set up in 2012 for a 12-month trial period. The aim was to assess the level and type of dedicated Helicopter Emergency Medical Service, or HEMS, required in Ireland, in light of recent closures of regional facilities such as Roscommon Hospital. Well, since its inception, it's become a vital asset in critical pre-hospital care and has completed over 3,500 missions. Commandant Oisin McGrath is Officer Commanding 301 Squadron, the Tactical Helicopter Squadron.
Yeah, I suppose the first helicopters came into the Air Corps in 1963, and we had almost 40 years of search and rescue with air ambulance operations nationally, really. But I think the EAS operation, since its kind of inception in 2012, has kind of ramped that up to another level. You know, with over 5,000 missions completed in a 10-year period, would probably almost match the missions that were completed over a 40-year period in the time now, in much less capable aircraft and probably a different era of aviation, I guess, more modern times now. But it's been busy, yeah.
For you as the man in charge, what are your priorities?
Safety is the number one. It has to be. You're bringing civilian passengers aboard military aircraft, and everything we do in terms of training, maintenance, be it flight crews, technical crews, has to be done to the highest standards and maintain that level of safety. All incidents, minor, it happens in aviation, they're reported, and then we use those incidents to backtrack and make sure that the procedures are adjusted to make sure it doesn't happen again.
What does it actually take then, by the time somebody's sitting in the command seat of one of these helicopters? What development and training has gone in for them?
Yeah, well, I guess particularly in the command seat, at the end of the day, the aircraft commander's decision is kind of final. What we do take CRM, which brings everybody's opinion, feeds into the aircraft commander. At the end of the day, it's that person's decision. We generally have guys with the higher end of the helicopter experience. So when a pilot comes in from their finishing their wings course on the PC9, they fly the EC-135 on their helicopter conversion course. It takes about 6 months to a year, depending on aircraft availability, and usually they consolidate for a year then afterwards. That builds about maybe 250-300 hours of flying time into them, where they go and cut their teeth on their own, fly some kind of fairly basic operations. From there they usually get a copilot course then on the 139, and they get maybe 3 years of sitting with the experienced guys and learn from them and see how they operate and see the decision making process and feed into it, I suppose, building their own picture of how things work. And usually after that 3 years they have enough hours again to go into the Garda Air Support Unit and fly the 135 again as a commander, and that again takes a high level of experience to be there. They're on their own 24-hour operation, daytime, nighttime, 2-minute response, so you need guys to be on the ball in terms of decision making, and usually they stay there for kind of 3 to 5 years, which firms up their decision making process and builds their experience on their own, I suppose, without the safety blanket of an authority over them. And then usually when they finish their time in the Garda Air Support Unit, they come back here as an aircraft commander, and that's when they feed straight into the EAS system as the aircraft commander. And usually you could be looking at guys with nearly 2,000 hours flying at that point, which is a lot. It's a high-end hours, and again, it has to match the risk.
One of those pilots that Commandant McGrath mentioned going through the training is Lieutenant Colin Delaney, currently a P2 or co-pilot on the 139. We sat into the 139 with Colin and his colleagues, Sergeant Philip Byrne and P1 Captain Jason Mc Dermott, the officer tasked with being responsible for the helicopter operation in Athlone. Colin explained the process that got him to the left-hand seat.
My name's Colin Delaney, and I'm a P2 on the 139. I suppose most people in helis would follow a very similar road. That's well worn at this stage, I suppose. So we start off in the PC9, you get your wings off that, and you're either, I suppose, you put forward your choice whether you want to go fixed wing or helis, and the organisation tries its best to accommodate whichever one you'd like to do.
Is there still a certain amount of suspicion amongst fixed wing pilots about heli pilots?
I suppose there is.
I think it works the other way. They're quite inferior.
Yeah, I suppose there's definitely a healthy rivalry there as well between us, but I'm sure there's a couple of guys who've gone fixed wing who probably would only like to try their hand as well at the helicopter flying and the mission scope that we cover as well. But so as we moved across then to the 135, there was 4 of us in my class that went onto it, and we did that. Took about 9 months training on the 135. After that, then we spent the bones of a year between our building and experience building before we moved across into the left hand seat, or the P2 or co-pilot seat, then in the 139. And from that you'll build operation experience within the 139, and from there, after you have adequate experience, I suppose, but you'd move down to Athlone then in the P2 role, which for the most part, other than supporting the P1 in the operation of the aircraft, really you're looking at the planning for all the EAS jobs.
I was going to ask you about that, because and we should clarify as well, because some people will be getting a little confused when you talked about the left seat and the right hand seat, because in aeroplanes the captain or the commander sits on the left, but in helis it's the other way around.
Yeah, it's the other way around. There's plenty of stories of why that is, and there doesn't seem to be a general accepted truth of why it was switched.
You don't care, because when people walk past they think you're the captain.
Oh, that's it, yeah. The P1 to be quick now to point out
Who the boss is.
Who the boss is, yeah.
No, I was going to ask you a little bit about that, because the division of work in a flight deck, anyway, it's not that you're sitting there just as a spare pair of hands. You have very specific duties to do.
Yeah, and I think EAS probably brings that, I suppose, to the fore even more, because it is so divided down there, because a call comes in, for example, and we'll be in the mission planning office, and a call will come in from the National Ambulance Service, and whether it's a potential call or it's a tasking, what will happen then is we'll go into the planning, and the P1, if it is a task, the P1 will check the weather, and once they're happy enough that the job can be completed on a weather standpoint of view, I suppose, and other considerations, they'll walk down to the aircraft, they'll start the aircraft up, so they don't even know what the call is, I suppose, is the big difference there as well. So then up above we'll have myself, the crewman, and the advanced paramedic then are looking at picking the PDLZ, which was spoken about before. And to be fair, we're lucky that in some instances with calls there already exists a PDLZ quite close, so we can use that one, so it cuts down the amount of time that we need. But from, I suppose, a call coming in to taking off, it really can be brought about by how much complexity there is to the mission. So in very mountainous areas, or even in West Galway, for example, it's quite rocky, so it can be hard to find a suitable LZ there that is close enough. And if we're lucky enough to have an ambulance on scene before us, they can be brought by the ambulance to the helicopter, which I suppose makes it easier. But going back to the planning point of view, we look at the PDLZ. Once we're happy then that we have a PDLZ that will work for us ourselves, we'll walk down to the aircraft. So the 3 of us will walk down, and we'll go down to the aircraft. The aircraft will be already running, ready for takeoff. We'll be given the thumbs up, I suppose, literally a thumbs up from the P1, and we'll all hop on board, and then the initial heading for the direction we're going in will be given by the crewman to the P1, and then we'll go into the pre-takeoff checklist from there, and we'll do our departure. And after that point then, you're still separated in some ways, because myself as the P2 will be putting in the lat long coordinates for where we have for that PDLZ into our FMS, or the GPS system on the aircraft to pick up. And then all that separation of the crew initially will all be fused together within a couple of minutes of taking off.
Captain McDermott explained more about the EAS 10th anniversary.
In June 2012, a pilot project was set up in the Midlands, currently based in Athlone, Custume Barracks in Athlone, DF installation. So an Emergency Aeromedical Support Service, to give it its full term, but we know it more locally as EAS. So that was set up in 2012. It was kind of set up due to the closure of some of the smaller medical facilities. So in that area it was Roscommon A&E at the time, so there was there was a lot of concern about the local people about the lack of medical A&E services in the area. So the solution at the time was seen to be EAS service. So a helicopter based in a medical installation or in a military installation, Custume Barracks in Athlone, as a pilot project initially, but now it has, due to a success that it has seen over the last 10 years now. This month, it has been made a permanent service and is actually more a national service now than just for the local people in the Midlands around the Roscommon, Longford, Westmeath area.
And so typically the decision that a helicopter is used versus an ambulance, where does that happen?
Well, it's all coordinated through the NEOC, so that's the National Emergency Operations Centre in Tallaght. So it's controlled by the National Ambulance Service. So their call centre, they have a floor in the Rivers building in Tallaght. So you have all the dispatchers that take all the 999 calls from all over the country, and they're all it's very efficient and well run setup, whereby they're all sitting on one floor, and they have immediate communications now, whether it be visually or through an intercom system. They can talk, and we have a fairly serious call here in a remote area, or we have a fairly serious call with technically or medically demanding call that might benefit from the input of a helicopter. So I suppose it's really up to them, the way they categorise their calls and the way they have a kind of a flow chart, and once it hits certain criteria, they will decide then if it warrants a helicopter. So what they will do is then they'll ring our advanced paramedic that's on duty. So I suppose to take it back again, the crew is the EAS crew is six people. So you have a pilot, a co-pilot, and a crewman EMT. And then you have the National Ambulance Service, Advanced Paramedic, and you have two technical staff that also are double up as op staff on the job. So they'll put the NEOC then will, if they receive a call or if they identify a call that they think might benefit from a helicopter, what they would do then is they'd ring the Advanced Paramedic down, and he'd look at it then with his medical lens or his medical hat on. And then he'd say, yeah, the weather's good, we have the fuel, if we get the call airborne we have full Tetris system, so we have comms with them all the time, and he'll decide then go or no go.
Very often you'll arrive on scene, but there'll already be an ambulance in attendance. So what's the addition that you're bringing to that scenario?
Well, Michael, I suppose there's two or three different things that we can bring to that. So within the ambulance service, you have different levels or different ranks of medical qualifications and ability, the same as every organisation. And it depends on what resources they have to allocate to that call at the time. Our advanced paramedics, they have what's called an extended scope of practice. So they have received a higher level of training to go onto the helicopter, so they can carry a greater quantity and quality of drugs. So whether it's for pain relief or sedation or whatever, they can bring that high level of care. So it really ties in with I suppose the way the whole medical service in Ireland has developed. Once upon a time, it was kind of what they call a scoop and shoot, where you just pick someone up from the side of the road or a field or something, got them and go to a hospital quick. Now they focus an awful lot more on pre-hospital care, is what it's called. So a lot of the interventions and a lot of the really important time-critical life-saving stuff happens in the field, in the house, at the roadside, and that's where it's time critical. And these guys, they're highly experienced advanced paramedics, and they go through a rigorous selection process to make it as far as the helicopter. So they'd be kind of at the top of the pyramid, I suppose, in their circle in the National Ambulance Service. And then, like, really, I've never seen. I'm sure they do, but they're very professional. But I've never seen them thrown by anything they ever see. So that's one thing. So the pre-hospital care is one element. The second element then is that if it's in a rural location, then we're sitting here in the 139. It's the ideal helicopter for this operation. Fast, long range. We cruise at 140 knots, but we can land anywhere. I'll show you in a while. We have a thing called slump pads. So it's where you can spread. It's an attachment for the land gear, and you can spread the weight. It's like a
soft field, for
soft
example.
field, exactly. Yeah, or in the winter time, or in the summertime, even a boggy area. So there's nowhere really that we can't land in terms of terrain conditions. So that allows us to get in close, and then obviously at the receiving facility, we can land in most locations around the country.
You talk about the base in Athlone, but where you're landing obviously is different. At this stage, you must have fairly well plotted out some good landing spots around Ireland.
Yeah, we have. Now we use a planning platform called the Health Atlas, and our colleagues in the Coast Guard and ICRR will be familiar with that package, whereby it's a planning tool that we can bring up a map of Ireland, and we have overlays on it of the ESB wires and stuff like that, and so we can do a lot of our planning before we leave. But the P2 will have a good idea of what we can expect in terms of wires and Street View, Google Street View. So there's a lot of stuff widely available, but it's all in one nice concise package that leaves his planning an awful lot more straightforward. But yeah, we're up to 7,500 PDLZs, so a predetermined landing zone around the country. So it's quite an amount. You bring up the map of Ireland, and it's just like it's dotted all over with PDLZs in every county. So it's quite. Now some of them we would go to scene, and you know, if someone has recently built a house on it, then we don't land in that field, or if there's animals, or if there's at this time of the year, you know, we regularly use football pitches. They're the ideal landing site because of size that we know and are familiar with, you know. But this time of the year now, you know, football matches and kids out training and so cool camps and all the things that we're familiar with around the country. But the good thing about the sports grounds are that every town and village has a GAA club or a soccer club or a rugby club, you know. So that's a very quantifiable size that we don't have to get too tangled up in worrying about slope or pedestrian controls, where every one of them usually has a fence around it, you know.
The technical crew is also part of the team, ensuring the helicopter is ready for an immediate dispatch. Sergeant Philip Byrne told us more.
I'm Sergeant Philip Byrne. I've been here since 2001, so a good long time. I was infantry before that, but I've been here the days before the 135 and the 139, Alouettes, Gazelles, Dolphins, Squirrels, twin engines, so good broad range.
You're mentioning some classic helicopters there, and in fact I can even see an Alouette.
Yeah, we have an Alouette here actually, yeah. So we kind of worked on them all, and then 05 the 135s came, 06 the 129s came, and since then it's predominantly 129s since, but we would broadly work on them all anyway. So
we're standing beside one of the helicopters now, and I suppose because people can't see, we're going to try and capture for people just the sheer size of it. I mean, even starting at the rotor, like we're looking at 5 blades?
Yeah, 5-bladed main rotor, fully articulated. It's medium lift. It's our workhorse. Like, I mean, I think, Jason, you can correct me, but I think there's nearly 14 different roles, 15 different roles. You're talking from what we're talking about here, the air ambulance, to firefighting with the Bambi bucket, troop transport. We were tasked with like SEAL surveys and the like by different agencies and all. So I mean, it's an absolute workhorse. The fact that we only have 6 and the work we get through is phenomenal. Like the Alouettes themselves had about 8,500 hours by the end of their life after 44 years, and we're already up on 7,000 hours on some of these airframes already, and they've been in since 06. So you can see the work they're getting through, you know.
And people often again associate helicopters with massive amounts of maintenance because there's so many moving parts. How does that plot out so that you have an aircraft ready every day, but then obviously you also got to take it back in for regular maintenance?
So like we'd go on flight hours and calendar, whichever comes first, but generally flight hours, we'd be flying a lot. So like our first interval will be a 25-hour, we call it a 25-hour check. It's basically just a larger daily inspection. Our daily inspection is something like this aircraft we just finished a daily inspection on, so pretty much every point of movement on the aircraft, every point of flight safety on the aircraft is touched, looked at, assessed, and if it's right and the whole aircraft's grand, we sign the aircraft out for a 24-hour period and the aircraft's able to fly for that day. But then after that, then for 25 of those flight hours, it'll come in for a check. It's like a larger DI, a few checks on the tail, measurements, and then at different points, 100, 200, 300, you know, thereafter different calendar times. Then, like, you know, you have a 6-month, a 1 year, 12-month inspections that will come up periodically as they come, like, you know. And then generally from the maintenance side, we'll try and make sure that they come in staggered, not all in one lump. Now, I mean, in practice that can be quite hard, as well as availability aircraft are kind of different. You know, waiting on parts, it might skew that. But generally they come in. They're like, now that we're so many years with them, the maintenance is a little bit more fluid from our point of view.
How do you get this aircraft ready for a day's work?
Depending on, like, the lads, the pilots would send down recs for what jobs will come the day after or a few days down the line, and they'll give us what fuel they need, equipment on the inside, the job it is, time on ramp, etc. And we'll configure the aircraft to what they need, bring it out then, fuel it up, and be there ready to start the aircraft. And but down at Athlone then it's different again on the EAS. Pretty much a set standards. Jason's kind of told you, we'll come down in the morning, have the aircraft ready about an hour before everybody gets there, and just have it out for when the P1 comes along. We'll do the start, and if there's any issues crop up then, generally we can fix it there and then. But if there's anything major, the aircraft has to come back here for major maintenance. We can do up to a 25-hour, as I was saying earlier, down there, but everything else after has to be down here.
So you've got all your resources and everything.
Yeah, your maintenance planning comes into things, so we'll know that's coming. So then we'll schedule aircraft changeover, and so make sure there's no interruption in the service at all.
You mentioned coming to helicopters from infantry. What made you do that? What was the idea?
I always wanted to be in the Defence Forces from day one, and my father was a great salesman, so I was mad for the army, and he sold it to me that in the Air Corps you can do your infantry stuff and then do your airplane stuff, which I was interested in. So no, it was great, great decision. The opportunities that it opens up to you within the job itself. No more than the lads. You travel all over the world on type courses, on maintenance courses, upskilling. The job itself. You're never in the hangar long. You're either down at Athlone. You hear jobs here. You could be down in Cork with doing anti-terrorism stuff. You could be with the Navy. You could be with the infantry somewhere firefighting. So there's plenty of scope for it. It's never usually a normal day. There's never usually consistency in your day unless you're on a big inspection or something like that. So it's
Do you enjoy flying in them?
I do. Well, I do because I know everybody who fixes them.
Yeah.
I have absolute confidence in everybody here. It's a great bunch of guys. And it is something you work in other places and you've seen operations elsewhere, and the professionalism and the way things are carried out and the adherence to safety, and it's second to none. And you can. It's very evident when you go abroad or you see other operations, and you throw your eye on things even as you're passing by. You say, wouldn't do that back home, So absolute supreme confidence in the aircraft, but more so the personnel.
I was curious about the idea that do you feel a slightly bit more protective or ownership about it and lend it out to the pilots occasionally?
Absolutely. No, it is. It's a huge combined effort, But you're looking at the aircraft, as I said, the DI every day. You're seeing the thing intimately. You're seeing little things that are either creeping that in the next inspection, right, we're going to have to replace that. They absolutely are. Something that you want to look after, and we've had these aircraft been with us since 2006, as I said. So they're all you kind of know then after a while, and you want to look after them.
Our visit to Baldonnel continues after this short break. Jason Mc Dermott mentioned earlier the skills of the national ambulance crews that fly with the EAS. Well, Pat Moran has been with the service from the start.
As you correctly said, yes, I've been here since June 2012. I was one of the first cohort of 6 trainee APs at the time. Very new, I suppose, service, hadn't really existed within the state, and fairly short introduction to it too as well. So I suppose from both parties, it got off the ground really quick.
I suppose the other thing that people might be fascinated too about is how the services that can be offered to somebody even 10 years later. We heard the idea of people being sort of scooped up and brought off to a hospital. Now the intervention happens on site.
Yes, I suppose if we look back, I suppose the closure of some of the local A&Es where most ambulances would have taken their patients, i.e. the nearest emergency department, I suppose that changed or had begun to change as a national policy. We had some strategies which kicked off about the same time, which are the national PCI centres, where cardiac patients, instead of going to the local ATs, were transported direct to definitive care. And I suppose that was hand in glove with the introduction of AIRCORP 112 and helicopter services within the state. It allowed us to arrive on scene, diagnose the patient, and at that time we had unique access. We could consult with the consultant of the day and seek his advice, administer medication, and transport these people directly to the PCI centre. I suppose at that time there was a time issue in that 90 minutes from diagnosis to door was the prescribed time, and I suppose with the 139 at over 300 kilometres an hour, this became very achievable. So ultimately what you had happen was people that would have not probably reached that window ultimately were transported and received the care and reaped the benefit for today.
And this is a phrase I think everybody is now fairly knows about, this golden hour or golden 90 minutes. But I'm thinking about you know, on standby for a call and your bags are packed. what do you have access to and what do you have to bring with you for a call?
So the aircraft, as I said, 139 is kitted out. There's a prescribed list. The essentials obviously wouldn't be a whole pile different from the back of an ALS or advanced life care ambulance. So you're talking about defibrillators, suction, you're talking about specific airway equipment, specific ALS drugs, and that sort of thing, to manage, I suppose, acute trauma or acute medical patients in the field. So whilst, yes, we'd love to bring the kitchen sink, we're obviously bound by aviation and the max up weight that these aircraft can carry. This is a factor. But also, the difference, I suppose, from a road ambulance is that we tend to strip these things out and we put the actual bare minimum in. So we carry 1s and 2s where, ambulances might carry 5s and 6. So it becomes really a daily task to make sure, first of all, that when we operate in the morning that the aircraft is docked and checked, and that ultimately batteries are changed and all that sort of stuff. But it's a stripped out kit that you would see in an ambulance with the benefit of some other equipment that is very specific to EAS.
And the working environment, of course, and when we can hear a helicopter going past us at the moment, it's noisy, it's moving, and let's be honest, it's not very spacious. It's spacious enough, but not very spacious.
Now, if I was a sceptic, I could say this is probably somewhat akin to an ambulance on a rocky road around rural Ireland. Yeah. But what I will say is, coming from specifically medical and the road use into it 10 years ago, there is a transition. The aircraft environment, I suppose, people see these things on television and it looks, it's fantastic and it looks so smooth and it's always on a sunny day. The reality is aviation in Ireland is very different. The vast majority of the time it's very poor weather, low cloud, there's a lot going on in the cockpit. But what we tend to find, as I suppose specifically from the AP perspective, is it's a hostile environment. During the summer, if it's 30 degrees on the ground, it's 40 in the back of the cockpit. The idea, I suppose, if you're in an ambulance or a car, you open a sunroof or open a window. That's not a possibility, obviously, when you're airborne. And conversely, then during the winter, what you'll find is there's no in between. The aircraft is a very effective heater, but it's designed to operate when the door closes or is closed. So we obviously carry a AIRCORP crewman who obviously crews the aircraft into the confined areas or into the landing zones. Once that door opens, it's whatever the ambient temperature is, probably with 5 degrees on top of it again. So if it's freezing outside, it's minus degrees inside. Bad for us, but obviously, conscious of our patients too as well. So it can be a challenge.
We were talking about your experience of the 10 years and now you're also going to introduce a colleague to me who's relatively new to the experience. Hi.
Michael, how are you? Tommy Monaghan, and I am an advanced paramedic generally based out of Galway, a very new recruit to the Aeromedical Service.
With those fresh new eyes and the perspective of working in this environment, what crossed your mind when you thought, I've got the job, I'm going to be doing this?
Well, I suppose Pat mentioned initially that it came, it was started in 2012 and I would have only been on the road maybe 2 to 3 years at that stage. So to see the helicopter service come into use back then, I suppose they would have regularly landed in Galway and would have been a regular pad for them to locate to. And to see those guys come in, I have to say, it was like, I don't want to use it really, but they would have been guys you would have really, really looked up to. They would have been the heroes of the service as such. So to further on my own career and then step into those shoes, it was like, wow, here's this opportunity. As you can imagine, I took it with both hands. Something I aimed for probably over the last 10 years myself.
And for a lot of people who, for example, might be conscious, it might be their first time in a helicopter. Even that, it must be difficult, even with small children, for example.
Yeah, absolutely. The big thing really, I suppose, is they would have ear defenders, protection from the noise, but certainly it's frightening for some patients, particularly elderly, when we're taking off. The crewman will be doing his visual assessment from the back. He'll have doors open. Patients will often reach out or feel like they're going to fall, and you're trying to reassure them while all this noise is going on. Of course, there's wind blowing in through the doors. They're looking out at their feet and all they can see is a couple of hundred feet of height. So I suppose it can be a very anxious time for patients. From the bit of experience I've seen with children, it's a big novelty for them, so long as they're well enough to enjoy it, but not always the case.
I've heard they also sometimes go away with a little gift.
Oh, that's yeah, there is a little teddy that they get on behalf of the Air Corps. It's something that's supplied, but a nice little touch, in fairness, something I was unaware of till I was here. I might even have one at home myself.
Finally, Pat, your recommendations for people, ordinary people, to get some first aid training?
Look, ultimately, I suppose, and we touched on it there briefly, I suppose one of the things that is very easy and readily available within the community is to become either a community first responder or at least receive some basic first aid training. it's a very short period of time to, I suppose, reap a huge investment. I mean, with the best will in the world, if we get a phone call for someone who's had a collapse, query cardiac arrest, unless CPR takes place more or less instantly, do you know that there's a huge percentage loss in the likelihood of recovery. So I appreciate from the public's perspective it's difficult to do, and the tendency is to stand back in these scenarios. With a little bit of training, it will give you the confidence and the encouragement, I suppose, to provide that initial care that's vital at that stage. And we've often had scenes where there's been a good recovery, and what a confidence boost. Or if that doesn't make your day to be able to say that you assisted a fellow human being, or ultimately were responsible for them waking up tomorrow morning, I can't think of anything else I could say that would be more beneficial.
Pat mentioned the Air Corp crewman on board too. Sergeant Diarmuid Corcoran has that job.
Hello, my name is Sergeant Diarmuid Corcoran. I'm a helicopter crewman, instructor and rating examiner in 301 Squadron in the Irish Air Corp.
Now, we've been meeting a lot of the crews today and that operate, but your function in the helicopter is quite specific.
Yeah, so I'm the rear crew, so I'm a crewman first, and then I'm also trained as an emergency medical technician, and I work closely with the advanced paramedic in the back of the aircraft. So I have a medical role and I have an aviation role, and on a day-to-day basis I have to jump between my aviation role, the medical role. Sometimes you're in the back and you're jumping between the two of them. So I have to stay tuned in to what's going on with the patient, and then I might get the pilots coming on the front to update me with weather and what's going on and stuff like that. So we kind of have to have a left and a hand in, both ears.
Putting both cams basically.
Exactly,
when you're doing that. And I would see you and your colleagues actually sometimes wearing a harness there, because you're actually sometimes outside the helicopter practically.
Yeah, a lot of people ask, what do we do and why did we stand outside? So just this morning I had the new crew course up in the mountains, so we were going into literally forest tracks, turning circles, and the reason we can go in there because the crewman is out and the pilot is in the front, he's on the right, or on the 139, he's on the right hand side, and I stand on the right, and the P2 is the pilot monitor and he's on the left. So our main job is with the eyes and ears of the pilot, so we can go into an area where he can't see the tail, he can't see what's underneath the aircraft. So through patter I'm basically talking him into the area. So between myself and the pilot, he has his references, and my job is then. So that's why we stand out there, is we basically are the eyes and the ears. It's all about the situational awareness.
It's a fierce handy parking.
I like to think, you see the scrapes in my van and stuff, but yeah, basically that's kind of it. Like, you have to be very spacious aware, your timing has to be right. Then you have to link in with an air traffic control call with a checklist, so you have to know when to cut in, cut out, so you have to tune into the two of them. So on EAS, when it goes into like that, when we're on the aircraft, when we're coming into approach, we'll be getting updates from scene, but once we go into our landing procedure, our 5S recce, the pilot goes through his 3 E's, his entry, exit and emergency. It's a sterile cockpit then, so we might have to wait until we get the wheels on to get in touch with the National Ambulance Service again, because we could be going into corner of a field, there could be a barn, there could be, I went over where hens came out of things, I've been in places where I got bits of silage drop coming up on me, so we always have to be aware of what's going on outside. So it goes into the sterile
and that's
cockpit.
interesting what you talk about, this idea of a sterile cockpit. That means there's no non-operational conversation at that moment.
No, so all the kind of chat, the chit chat is stopped. We go into our patter, we go into our procedures, so there's no interference, there's no, we'll have a look at this, have a look at that. It's a set line down procedure, and you don't go off that procedure until the wheels are down and everyone's in there safe, because the most important thing for us is getting there safe. I'm sure some of the pilots have said as well, they pick up on, they have to do the call cold, so when he finds out what the call is, we just tell him, or the advanced paramedic will tell him, we're going to Bundoran or we're going to Monaghan town. He looks at the weather, he sees that's fine and he's gone, so he makes that decision. So that's where it starts from there.
So how did you end up in this position?
Yeah, so I joined the Defence Forces back in 2003. 19 years now. So I joined originally to get into the search and rescue side of things, because I was quite a strong swimmer and stuff. My dad was a guard, so I kind of had that growing up, helping people from that side of things. Trained as a heavy diesel mechanic then, and finished up with that, and then the crew course came up. So it comes through the local order, the routine orders, and you go for a selection course. One of the few units in the Defence Force that runs a selection course. It's a full week. You have to do an interview, so it started off at 75 was whittled down to 23, and 12 was finished, and they took on 2 to start. So that's how you get into it. So the selection course is it's robust, and there's a fitness test in it, a bleep test in it, a dummy drag, a rope pull. Then you have a lot of classroom work. You have to learn your patter. You have a fly-in test. You have the downwash test, which is the hardest thing to pass. So you're in the middle of the lake bring the aircraft down over top of you low level, and you just swim out from underneath the downwash. Jump off the lake, then you have a flying test as well, so it's a very busy and robust week. And then you have it's called a pool test, but it's basically to push it to your limits in the pool, so you have a pool test as well.
You also, as you say, as well as being a crewman, you also have paramedic skill as well.
Correct, yeah, we're emergency medical technicians, so when we go on scene to a call, whatever the call is, we'll all get into the aircraft after the pilot has started up. We'll get our PDLZ, we've done all that. So then when we get on scene, then sometimes we're first on scene, and sometimes there's a road crew who've gotten there just before. So I have to get involved in the medical side of things as well. So depending on the nature of the casualty and what's going on. So one of the incidents was an OTC we went to. I basically had to, so I'm loading everyone up. I had to take the mother of the young boy, get her into the aircraft. I have to keep an eye on the 6 paramedics that are helping the paramedic on the advanced paramedic on the ground. I have to keep an eye on my aircraft. I have to keep an eye on my 2 pilots. I have to make sure the 2 firemen who are cutting the gate the far side can stop. So I have to organise the scene. So you have on-scene management, then you have to load everyone into the aircraft, get people back away from the aircraft. This is all while the engine and the rotors are still running. Load people up. I have to go then get everyone strapped in, make sure the advanced paramedics are in. If you have family members, the patient's all right, confirm with him we're good to go. Me and the pilot then will get into our sequence for taking off. We take off, then we shut the door, gone through all that. He'll go back onto, so we have a patient in the back, we go to the cab isolated, then I go back into helping the back of the patient. So on that day we were doing CPR for 25 minutes between myself and the advanced paramedic. I was drawing up drugs, I was doing CPR on the patient. You're also trying to keep the parent who's in the back calm. Then we're in agreement when we come into Dublin that he go back doing CPR, I go back to landing the aircraft. We land the aircraft successfully, safely again, go back into our procedures. We unload the patient into the back of the ambulance. Then we'll go to sometimes I travel to the hospital with the paramedic, or sometimes we'll go back to Baldonnel or wherever to get fuel.
I'm curious when friends or relatives ask what do you do, what kind of short version you can give them, because it sounds quite complicated.
It is, you kind of tell them you're a helicopter winchman or you're a helicopter crewman. Oh, well, what does that do? And then you're trying to describe some of the things we do, and it's like, oh, I didn't realise you did that, or I didn't know you did that. And then of course I'm sure the Coast Guard lads get it themselves. Everyone thinks I'm in the Coast Guard, but when you explain what you do for a crewman's role, we're door gunners, we're EMTs, we're general purpose crewmen, we do cargo singing, Bambi ops, neonatal transfers, patient transfers, EAS, bog surveys, river surveys, SEAL surveys, sniping from the aircraft with the special forces insurgent. We're door gunners, winchmen. We're starting to run a rescue swim course now as well, so you're kind of a one-stop shop for everything. So it's definitely interesting and it's busy, so it's enjoyable as well.
Sergeant Diarmuid Corcoran there. Well, let's leave the last word with Commandant Oisin McGrath, the officer commanding 301 Squadron. With 10 years done, what are his hopes and plans for the next 10 years?
Well, I think for the future would be to become a much better resourced service in terms of pilots, technicians, new aircraft, an increased base where we are, or a new base somewhere else, that we would have a much more permanent structure, where while it's fine and it's a detachment and it works, it's still a tent. It's a hangar tent rather than a concrete hangar. I'd like to see a purpose-built area for EAS, whether that be on a site in the Midlands or whether it be wherever that is. I'm sure somebody higher will make that call, but that would be nice. And then to have it fully resourced, have a full roster there. I'd like to see it as a squadron on its own. It falls under 301 Squadron, which already we deal with special force operations, international air ambulances, we deal with firefighting, we deal with troop transport, we deal with marine counter-terrorism, naval ops, and then EAS is just this add-on that we have, when actually it should be a fully structured squadron with a squadron commander, 2IC, and a bunch of pilots and aircrew attached to it, and it should be fully self-sufficient, similar to the air support unit.
It's something you said earlier on, about civilians on a military helicopter, and also then you've the Garda support unit and liaisons with other operations like the National Ambulance.
I would safely say that the relationship between the departments, be it Health and Defence, and then the HSE and the National Ambulance Service and the AIRCORP are pretty strong, and the relationships are good. So,
the organisation's recruiting. What would your encouragement be to somebody who thinks that maybe there is a career in that for me?
You'd need to think of it from a two-stream, approach. One is the flying, like military aviation. It's impossible to beat. I won't say it's hard to beat. It's unbeatable, really. You don't do this kind of flying in any other organisation. Other organisations will be very specific in one role. You're looking at multi-role pilots. You've got currencies. You could have 10, 12 different currencies to maintain, be it fast roping, be it bambi bucketing, cargo slinging, and all of those things we do. On night vision goggles at night time, so you could have 20 currencies to maintain, which just keeps the level of excitement up on the flying side. And equally on the other side is the camaraderie, the friendships, the involvement in sport, the support that you get as an individual rather than a pilot is incredible. So I'd highly recommend it. If looking back at my own career, 20 years coming up in September now, I'd actually look back and not change any day of it. So,
Our thanks to the Irish Air Corp for their help and hospitality this week. We look forward to returning soon to Baldonnel to mark more events as part of AirCorp 100.
To get the news first, subscribe now to Squawk 7000 on your favourite podcast platform.